Hello and welcome to the skating lesson. I'm Dave Leese, and today I'm thrilled to welcome the 1994 Olympic champion and first Olympic champion from Ukraine, Oksana Baiul. Oksana, welcome to the skating lesson.
Oh, Dave, hey, how are you? And I just wanted to say thank you to all your fans who are going to be watching us today or tomorrow. And I am so thrilled to be on your platform, honestly.
Well, thank you. Well, I am thrilled to have you, and I wanted to have you on to talk about the situation in Ukraine because you have been such an outspoken leader, especially in the US, about what is happening at the war in Ukraine, as well as a really ambassador and advocate for the Ukrainian athletes. And over the weekend, you released a video to Thomas Bach, and I was wondering if you could tell us what you said and why you made this video.
I made this video because I feel it's necessary right now to speak to him because he is trying to put on all the federations, international federations, the responsibility of either they will allow Russian and Belarusian to compete or not. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like he suggested, and then everybody else will have to make a decision. And I think it's kind of very strange because, like, I sent you the video yesterday that the Hockey Federation did not allow for the whole season, you know, for Russian and Belarusian skaters, hockey players, you know, to be involved in hockey, in international sport. But there are other sports that are allowing. So I felt like Olympic Games basically is 16 months away by now, somewhere there. And I feel like he have not made his final decision on the Olympic Games for 2024. And I felt like not only myself, but Ukrainian athletes, they're making the videos, we're releasing them to him, you know, because I feel like IOC is gonna be the final people, you know, who's gonna make a decision for the Olympics. Mm-hmm. And that's why I made that video, especially towards him, to him. And there is nothing more I can do either than just ask him to be fair, to have heart. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can speak and speak and speak on what Russians are doing wrong. I mean, for the crying out loud, I mean, they're are the biggest team that has been busted for doping. Mm-hmm. I mean, we obviously did see how Valiva got busted for doping. And yeah, I just feel right now the world is not ready to allow Russians and Belarusians to participate in the games till the war is over. Mm-hmm. That's how I feel. I feel like our really good friend, Tatiana Navka, who's married to Peskov, you know, she is obviously totally sponsored by the Putin, you know, by the government. All of the shows that she does is sponsored by the government. Russian government. Mm-hmm. And, you know, like she says, well, sports has to be not attached to, you know, the war. But then she comes out and she does interviews where she says, well, if Ukraine is not going to be at the Olympics, you know, because the Ministry of Sports of Ukraine does not want Ukrainians to compete with Russians and Belarusians together. She basically says, well, then nobody would even notice.
Mhm.
And I think it's very insulting. You know, I think she's trying to just poke the bear. You know what I mean? And, you know, I mean, I am a fighter too. You know what I mean? And if you poke the bear and poke the bear, then Oksana will come out and Oksana will stand up for Ukrainians because, you know, when the war started, I realized when Putin announced that we're gonna, you know, take Ukraine over in like 3 days, that was his words, I came out and I start calling people right away. So, I mean, it's unthinkable what's going on right now in the world of sports.
I want to ask you about Tatiana Navka, because people think of her as an Olympic champion ice dancer from Russia, but she's actually from Ukraine. So, and the two of you grew up together. So can you explain, you know, where Tatiana Navka is from and some of that history?
That's true. You have to understand, a lot of communistic countries, you know, they basically support their athletes. And I'm speaking about China and the way how I grew up. I've been supported by the government a lot. So a lot back then in the 80s, it used to be very different because it used to be CCCP. And basically what it meant is I was born in Ukraine.
In Dnipro, right?
In Dnipro, exactly. The funny story is, Dave, when I was performing in the 90s, it used to be called Dnipropetrovsk. And a lot of people who used to comment on it, they couldn't say it. So now they shortened it and it's Dnipro. Yes, we were born in Dnipro. Dnipro is Ukraine, but back then Dnipro used to be a part of CCCP. And then in the early 91, it just Russia collapsed. So back then, she already went, a lot of coaches from Russia back then used to come to Ukraine and they used to scatter it for, you know, like a talent. And they used to bring it back to Moscow and then they will nourish it, you know, and take it to the next level. And because everything collapsed, I ended up basically representing, you know, Ukraine. And in 1992, they went as the Soviet team to the Olympics, like a neutral, you know. And then 1994 is when I was the first one who was going to the Olympics, and I won the first gold medal for the country of Ukraine. But the thing is, sports really teaches you to respect each other. You know, sport is really teaching you to be partners with each other. But when the war started, there is nothing you can do other than feel where you come from. That's what happened to me. My mother died when I was young, and she is buried in Dnipro. And Dave, there is nothing I can do. I spent my whole entire childhood at the ice rink. You know, I was doing what I loved to do. My mother taught me, you have to go to school, you know, you have to become a doctor or a teacher or somebody. And I have just following my dream, following my heart. I loved being at the rink in Ukraine. And when the war started, I mean, you can't help but feel in your heart where you come from, who you are.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because you mentioned Tatiana Navka's shows getting sponsored by the government. And I've read that she has applied to actually hold shows in Lugansk. And Lugansk is obviously one of the territories that has been attacked by Russia and such a part of the war. And I was wondering if you could explain what a move of propaganda and how insulting that is for the people of Ukraine that they want to host an ice show from Russia there.
Well, this is why I am telling Thomas Bach, please do not make any type of decisions, towards Russians, because the people who are skating in Russian shows, and obviously she will have to bring, the whole show, they are taking the money from Vladimir Putin, because Vladimir Putin is a person who is basically supporting her shows. Mm-hmm. She's applying for grants, mm-hmm. and she's getting them. Mm-hmm. She just actually applied it today again for another grant. So every day situation changes. And basically what she announced it is that she wants to go to basically a territory that has been yanked by the Russians, but it's not their territory. They think it is, but the whole UN is not recognizing them as the Russian territory. So it's a little bit messy right now. That's why I'm making the video and I'm addressing this issue, because it's too early to allow Russian skaters who are supporting Putin. This is not against, Dave, you and I were doing this video for a skating community. Mm-hmm. And we all know how many Russian coaches teach in America. Mm-hmm. Okay? We understand they do not support Putin. They do not skate in Navka's shows. Navka is sanctioned by Europe, US, Canada. I don't know the country that she can travel to right now. Plus her shows are supported by Putin. So all the skaters that are skating in her shows basically is taking Putin's money.
Well, you say that, but last June, I had a lesson with Viktor Petrenko, and he had been in the war in Ukraine. He was in Odessa at that time, and he was in the bunker of his basement. He came here, we had a lesson, and he was supposed to be going back to get a visa for his new wife. He wound up being in Navka's show, which was a huge situation. Can you talk about, that as a Ukrainian and that situation?
My really good friend, Viktor Petrenko. Dave, I will say one thing about Viktor. Mm-hmm. I'm very disappointed in him. Mm-hmm. That's all I can say. Mm-hmm. I really don't want to go into the details because I have a lot to say about him. Mm-hmm. I will not. Mm-hmm. I want people to understand, yes, he did make the decision in the middle of the summer to go and skate in one of the Navka's shows. And I'm going to be honest with you. a lot of Ukrainian skaters, they worked for Tutberidze as the second coaches, you know what I mean? They chose to come back to Ukraine, and they are right now in Ukraine because I am speaking to a lot of Ukrainian skaters, and I'm not gonna speak on their behalf, okay? I can't, because they make their own decisions and they make their own choices. But what I can explain to you is that the situation is very dangerous with the way how Thomas Bach just told everyone, you will make your own decisions. And the reason is why, because I asked Ukrainian skaters, what are you guys up for? What's your plans? And they said to me, well, right now it's the end of the season. We will take a little break, and then we will start getting ready for the Olympics. I mean, for the Olympics 2026, but also for the next, season. And I'm kind of like sitting there thinking to myself, like, the Minister of Sports, obviously in Ukraine, had said, we don't want to compete with Russians and Belarusians, right? But then, if ICU will decide to allow them back in, Russians and Belarusians, then Ukrainian skaters will just probably have to make their decision, when the ICU decision will be made. Do you understand what I mean? Why it's so dangerous? And I personally cannot even imagine how it would feel if the Russians are allowed and the war is not over, for Ukrainian and Russians to be seated in the same dressing room.
Well, I wanted to ask you, because you sent me a picture of an ice rink that you trained at that has been bombed and destroyed. Can you tell people how Ukrainian skating has been impacted by this war?
David, thank you so much for even bringing this up. Actually, what happened was the ice rinks were, in Ukraine, we used to go to a lot of different competitions, and it used to be Odessa, Kiev, Dnipro, where I come from. It's a very complicated name, Severodonetsk. And the rinks were being bombed, and believe it or not, when the Ukrainians went to the World Championship last year, and obviously they couldn't prepare themselves properly. Because the country was under the attack already back then. I mean, the bombings were start happening. The Ukrainian national team had to take a train to go to Poland, then to stay in Poland with Poland families who would take them in, and then they would go to the Worlds. Oh my goodness gracious. And then they were thinking, because I would start getting a lot of phone calls from a lot of different clubs in America. And I just wanted to thank all of them for being in support. And I'm not going to name names, but they all know who they were. And I will never forget that. Mm-hmm. They would tell me, Oksana, we're welcoming skaters from Ukraine to come and train at our ice rinks. So when the worlds were finished, I called them. I said, well, there is this possibility, then there is this possibility. Would you like to go? And they told me, they said, let us think about it. And then I will be speaking to the clubs, and then, you know, Ukrainian coaches and Ukrainian skaters, they would tell me, we want to go back home and we want to train at our ice rinks. And when the Kharkiv was bombed, the question that you asked me about the rinks, the coaches would take a whole family and travel to another rink inside the country, and they will help each other, you know, as a coaches, and they would train there and they would bring their students. And, you know, I know it's very unpleasant, I would say, what's going on in Ukraine. It's scary.
I wanted to ask a bit about some of the stuff on social media, because the media isn't covering all aspects of this and what is being said. And some Americans on Twitter didn't understand what you were speaking about with Sasha Julin last week. You were defending Adam Rippon. And Adam Rippon on his podcast had defended the ban against Russian and Belarusian athletes along with Ashley Webb. Sasha Julin spoke out against Adam and really went and made inappropriate comments. And I was wondering if you could just speak out, you know, about what Julin said and why you defended Adam.
Well, Dave, you probably hear the stories when I came to the United States. I mean, the first ice rink and the first place where I was living was Simsbury, Connecticut. And I needed to get a haircut. And I called, I don't remember how I got his number, but I called this person, his name, Johnny Lavoie. He's probably looking at me right now like, oh my God, like she is dark, you know, because he's the one who cut my hair short and I've become blonde. And I really didn't back then understood what the gay person is. Do you know what I mean? And we have become friends in 90s. And I mean, there is not a secret inside the figure skating community. My goodness gracious, used to travel with 5 or 6 gay men to a lot of different shows, and they were like my support team.
Your family,
so, yeah. So my God, I mean, I am not a stranger to gay community. I'm not a stranger to LGBT, and I clearly understand, you know, I mean, some people realize earlier, some people born, I mean, they born this way, you know what I mean? And then when the person realizing it and they come out and they say, I'm gay, you know, it was nothing shocking for me. I always, I mean, it is what it is. Do you know what I mean? It's just the way how it is. And I understand that. So when the remarks were made to Thomas Bach by Adam, right? He really didn't even touch Alexandra. He didn't say one word about him. And then because, you know, I am looking through the media, not in America, people understand, you know, like Ukrainian media, Russian media. So I'm looking through the media. And this is what comes up. I felt personally like it's an insult on LGBT community.
Julien was saying that Atom should have gotten an operation to be more competitive in figure skating.
Yeah, but you know
Worse than
what?
that, yeah.
We see, Julien likes to say, and all the skaters who is in Russia, you know, skating in NAFCA shows, they all like to say sport has nothing to do with politics. But we all clearly know in 2014, if you remember, Putin said no LGBT community is allowed to come to the Olympic Games. Do you remember that scandal?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh
Yeah.
my goodness gracious, like, how can you discriminate like that towards people? People are people, love is love. You know what I mean? Yeah, so that's why I felt like I had to say something, you know? I felt almost like it's an attack on me, you know what I mean? Because gay people are my friends.
You also implored Scott Hamilton lately because he's doing a cancer benefit at your old rink Simsbury. And initially Viktor Petrenko was listed to participate, and you got that changed as well. You've been fighting a lot of battles lately. Yeah, this is.
I just called Scott and I said to Scott, Scott, please hear me out. And I am not begging. This is your event. You can tell me cancer should not be allowed to be politicized. You know what I mean? But I said to Scott, Scott, Viktor is taking Putin's money right now, skating in Russia, doing the show for NAFCA. It's just not right. This is not against, you know, anyone who is working in America or Canada and they are Russian coaches. You understand what I mean? This is little too personal, you know, that's how I felt. Like if he chose to go to Russia and if he chose to go to take blood money, then that's his decision, you know?
So I want to ask you why the Russian skaters should be banned, because people ask this question. Obviously, the military is the military, the skaters are skaters, but they are all state sponsored. So is it that they're getting money from the government? What is it? And can you explain what it means to be state sponsored because we in America, you know, skaters are not state sponsored.
Right. Or China, you know,
Yeah.
China is state sponsored too. Well, this is what happens. The government creates funds, and those funds comes obviously from government, and the top body for the government is Vladimir Putin. So then those funds has been transferred to a lot of different federations, and that's how they basically, you know, take care of their national treasures.
And they also all do shows as well.
Basically,
Overbook and
well, basically what's going on is like if NAFCA's getting grant from obviously Vladimir Putin, right? And on top of everything, she is sanctioned, you know, by every single, my goodness gracious, Europe, America, Canada, every single country. You cannot legally, there is a code in America that if you work with people who are sanctioned, you are not allowed basically to work with them. That's why. That's the most proper way I can explain that. Like, I remember in the beginning of the season, they've tutberidze came to US. And I kind of like sit back and thought to myself, this is really strange. Like, either she does have a visa, you know, like multi-year visa, or she has an American passport. You know what I mean? But I think she does have an American passport because she used to work in the shows in early 90s. Because in the early 90s, a lot of skaters who now went back to Russia in 2006, they obviously had become a legal citizen of this country, of USA.
And her daughter was born here. Diana was born in Vegas.
Well, Diana, I guess, born in Vegas, right? So, yeah, so that's why they should be looked into. And
yeah, it's interesting that she doesn't apply for the grants from Putin. The grants are always listed as Navka, Averbuk, and Plushenka. But her
yes, yeah, but don't forget the ice rink where she's training at right now have been built with probably some sort of grant money, and she's also probably
she was sponsored by Sberbank, Gazprom. They were all sanctioned.
Exactly. They're all sanctioned. Exactly.
Now, you are one of the few Olympic champions from Ukraine that actually speaks out against the war. We see Oksana Grishuk, Tatiana Voloshajar, they really don't say much about the war, and they have family members, obviously, from Ukraine. So do certain athletes get a pension if they receive a gold medal from Russia? Like, why is that certain athletes are quieter about this?
I don't know, and I cannot speak on their behalf, because everybody right now is making their own bed, and everyone will be sleeping in it. And I can't imagine. I don't sleep well at night. I'm being honest with you, because of what's going on in Ukraine. And, you know, sometimes I do speak to Ukraine around 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning when I can't sleep. I can only speak on my behalf, and I can only see Ty Babylonia is pro-Ukrainian. You know, she comes out and she supports Ukraine publicly. Brian Boitano did an event when the war just broke out. He raised a lot of money for Ukraine. I don't know. And that's why I personally feel I speak out to you from the bottom of my heart. And my heart really, really hurts right now. And kids literally are killed in Ukraine. And a lot of people, a lot of athletes, they chose to go fight for the country. And a lot of people, they choose not to. And they wanted to train, and they wanted to be soldiers in a sport that they're in and they're representing. So.
Well, earlier you did mention Kamila Valieva, and you mentioned about how she had tested positive for doping. This court case has been going on for over a year without any really updates. What do you think a proper punishment should be for an athlete who is getting illegal drugs? No one thinks that she is buying this herself at the pharmacy. Obviously, if this is a state-sponsored system, you know, that this comes from the top, from even above her coaches. You know, what is a proper punishment for that?
Well, do you remember a scandal with doping in 2014? You remember that?
I do, yes.
I mean, Russians every Olympics, they get busted for doping. And with her, it's a little bit different because I was asked to talk about her. And I do understand what it feels to be a minor. You understand what I mean? Because when I won the gold medal, I was a minor too. So when you're 16, you really don't understand a lot of things, and you are pressured to do a lot of things that you don't want to do. And I think with her, I've never commented, but I will now. I personally think, okay, the law in the books, on the books, have to be written. If the minor gets busted for, you know, the positive test, then the coach should be responsible for it. And I think they just allowed her to skate, and everybody was kind of like in little shock and disappointment because, like, oh my God, usually, you know, when you're an athlete over 18, I mean, that's it. You're done. You know what I mean? You have positive probe, so that's it. You cannot compete anymore. And because it's not, has been properly written, that's my opinion, in the law, in sports, like what is exactly had to be done to a minor, that, you know, they allowed her to compete, and then now they going through the process, you know, I mean, Russians feeling entitled, and they're saying, no, I mean, she drank from the grandfather's glass. That's how the drugs got into her body, but it doesn't really matter how they did got into her body. It was in her body, you know, and they did 2 tests, and they both came back positive. So, yeah, and Americans basically still do not have their medals, and I just think it's crazy. You know what I mean? It's a very gray area, and it had to be talked about.
When you were competing, did you make any of the decisions in your own career? That I can't imagine that.
Yes, I did make the decision after the collision. Oh my God. See, a lot of things, like with Russian athletes, like when I'm comparing myself to them, I don't understand a lot of things. And I'll give you an example, or I'll tell you a story.
Yeah, okay.
When I collided with
Tatiana Shevchenko?
With Tatiana Shevchenko, yes. That was first year Ukraine was going to the Olympics. And Ukrainian team had no money whatsoever. And our doctor, Ukrainian doctor, did not even have proper medication to stitch my leg. So the German doctor stepped in and said, can I put stitches on your leg? Well, obviously Galina said yes. Oh my goodness gracious. So I knew even with stitches, I'm not gonna give up.
Yeah.
I'm gonna skate no matter what.
Mhm.
It wasn't even crossing my mind that I will not compete. No way.
Mhm.
So that's the decision I have made. All the other decisions were made by the coach, obviously.
Mhm. Even turning professional, coming to the US, those is, yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can't bring a minor to a different country.
Mhm. Yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah. Did you know Eteri Tutberidze back when you competed? Was she a well-known skater?
I have never met her.
Okay.
No, no. Our path has never crossed, and I hope it will never will. But never say never.
Yeah. Well, you have been such a defender, and some people wanted to know what you think of skating in general right now. You know, when you skated, there was such a balance of artistry and athleticism, and it's why you are so remembered for having that, you know, that artistry in addition to your jumping ability. What do you make of the skating now?
It's difficult. It's difficult, and we can't hold the time. Do you know what I mean? Like, we have to walk with the time. So when I used to skate, it used to be, you know, different judging position, and the marks were different, and you know, the second mark was more important than the artistic was more important than technique. Now it's just one mark. I don't know. I just feel like Kernik, do you know what I mean? He was the one who changed that
Yes.
from, you know, 6.0 to just one mark. I think it become a little boring. And I know he's still in power with an ICU position. And I know he likes to go to a lot of events, and he likes to say things like how boring the figure skating is without Russians. All I hear is how wonderful it is without Russians. So I just think, you know, I mean, I enjoy watching Malinin doing quad axel or quadruple axel. I'm saying to myself, like, whoa, you know, in my time, nobody could do that. Now people do this type of thing. So good for them.
Do you enjoy watching someone like Jason Brown skate? Or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, my goodness, it's one of a kind. Yeah, those gems, they come one in a million. Absolutely. It's
Well, as we wrap up, how can people help? You mentioned that a petition was being formed. You know, how can someone who watches this video, you know, help the Ukrainian athletes and get the attention of Thomas Bach?
I knew you would ask me this question. For some strange reason, Dave, somewhere in the back of my mind, you know, like you always think, like, what is, like, Dave will ask. And I could not thank you enough. And I will be honest with you. I have said what I said, and I'm sure 50% will like it, and 50% will say, how could she even say that? But, you know, I can, and I said everything from the bottom of my heart. And when I go and do interviews, I do not ask people for money, ever. I have not made one penny on this war. I do believe in the beginning of the war, I had to say I am pro-Ukrainian. And the reason is why I'm speaking in right now is because we, as a Ukrainians, really feel it's a little too early for Russia to be allowed to compete again. Because, you know, I've told you why. And I just want people to sit back and understand one thing. We, as the Ukrainians, did not start this mess. Putin did. And there is people who will support him, and they will say, well, what he's doing is right. And I feel what he's doing is wrong. And this is not, for me personally, war against a lot of Russian coaches or Russian skaters. It's against Putin and people who are supporting his regime.
Yeah. So is there a petition that people can sign and support?
Oh, yes, they can sign, they can support it. I mean, you can post what I have sent it to you. I mean, you and I mean, behind the scenes, we stay in constant, you know, communication. I just want people to sit back and really clearly understand. He is the one who started this war. He is the one who started provoking Ukrainians, and we have no choice other than to fight. That's it. That's it. That's just period for this conversation. Well, Ukrainian people will fight, and I do have a feeling that nobody wants to have peace. We want to have peace. We want to live in a perfect world. But Putin says, well, they don't want to negotiate, but then he's bombing Ukraine. So how can you negotiate with the terrorist? He is a terrorist, basically, you know what I mean? And I hope this war will end up soon.
I think everyone watching hopes that as well. And I thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us today about this.
Dave, thank you so much for asking me to speak about this. And I don't speak to you, I don't do this interview because I want the publicity. I speak for Ukrainian people. I really do. I really do. Because, you know, I feel like when they will hear this, they will have another wind under their wings to have hope that they will be able to do what they love to do.
Well, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, the skating lesson. You're the best. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Thank you, David. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.